Elias Thorne was a man forgotten by luck long before he understood what luck meant. His ranch, a dying stretch of cracked earth on the Arizona frontier, stood like a stubborn memory of a life he once believed would bloom. With only 3 half-starved horses, a creaking windmill, and a cabin held together by desperation, Elias lived quietly day after day, refusing to abandon the land his father had worked until his last breath. The nights were the hardest when the desert grew cold, when the silence grew heavy, and when the memories of better days crawled back like unwelcome ghosts. It was on one such night as a thin moon brushed the desert with silver that Elias heard the faint dragging sound, soft, unsteady, human. He stepped out with nothing but a lantern and the old rifle he never loaded, because he was more afraid of mistakes than danger. In the dim light he saw him, an Apache warrior, young, wounded, bleeding from the side, leaning against the dying cactus as if the earth itself refused to let him fall. Elias froze, knowing the stories. The warnings the fierce settlers carried like religion, but the young warrior's eyes, sharp, dark, burning with pain, held no anger, only exhaustion. Without thinking, without planning, without fear, Elias dropped the rifle, lifted the man's arm over his shoulder, and carried him inside. For hours he cleaned the wound, boiled water, tore pieces of his own blanket for bandages, praying the man wouldn't die under his roof. When the warrior finally woke, he spoke only once. "You helped me." Elias nodded, unsure if the gesture was foolish or noble. The warrior touched his chest with 2 fingers. "Kohana," he said, his name. Then he pointed at Elias. Friend, Elias, had never been called that word by anyone in years. For the next 2 days, he cared for Kohana, feeding him broth, helping him stand, listening to the broken English stories of Apache mountains, warriors, and a people who were not the monsters settlers painted them to be. Kohana spoke of brothers, of war, of survival. Elias spoke of loss, of drought, of loneliness. 2 worlds so distant sat under the same failing roof and shared the same fire. On the 3rd night, Kohana stood stronger, determined to leave. He placed his hand on Elias's shoulder. "You gave life," he said quietly. "Apaches remember." And without another word, he disappeared into the desert darkness. Elias watched him go, believing that would be the end of it. That his act of kindness had been a small flame in the wind, destined to fade. But destiny had different plans. At dawn the next morning, Elias stepped outside to feed the horses, but froze, breath leaving his chest in one violent gasp. The horizon, miles and miles of it, was lined with movement. A sea of riders, shapes emerging from the rising sun, drums, hooves, dust spiraling like storms. The Apaches, hundreds, no, thousands, were approaching his ranch in silence so heavy it crushed the air. Elias felt the earth shake beneath their numbers, 1,000 warriors, armed, proud, unstoppable, riding toward the poorest rancher in Arizona. His hands trembled, his legs weakened, his heart pounded like a drum of doom. He didn't know whether this was gratitude or judgment, whether he had saved a life or doomed his own. As the first row of warriors halted only a few feet from him, Elias saw Kohana at the front, alive, strong, regal. The young warrior raised his hand. The entire Apache force fell silent, and Elias understood this dawn was going to rewrite his entire fate. For several breathless seconds, Elias stood frozen as the desert wind carried dust between him and the army gathered before his failing ranch. Kohana dismounted, stepping forward with the kind of presence that made even the silence feel small. "Elias Thorne," he announced with a voice that echoed like command and gratitude woven together. "The man who gives life stands before the Apache nation." Elias swallowed, unsure whether he should bow, speak, or run. Before he could decide, an elder stepped from the riders, a figure draped in woven cloth, his face lined with decades of war and wisdom. The warriors parted around him as if space respected him. The elder studied Elias, eyes narrowing not in hostility but in deep ancient evaluation. "My grandson," he said, pointing at Kohana, "would have died without you." Elias felt his throat tighten. I just did what anyone with a heart would do." The elder shook his head. "Many have hearts. Few use them." With that he raised his cane high, and a roar erupted from the Apache ranks, not of war but celebration. Drums thundered. Voices chanted. Horses pawed the ground as though even they understood something sacred was happening. Elias stood helplessly as the entire Apache nation surged forward, not attacking, but working. They dismounted in waves and spread across his land, like a well-trained army turned construction force. Warriors dug trenches, women carried water, children gathered stones, elders prayed blessings over the soil. Elias tried to protest, but Kahana rested a hand on his shoulder. "You gave life to one Apache," he said. "Now 1,000 give life to you." Hours passed as his land transformed. Fences were rebuilt straight and strong. The water well, long clogged and useless, was cleared and revived by Apache engineers who used tools Elias had never seen. His barn, once on the verge of collapse, stood tall after the warriors replaced its beams and roof in a matter of hours. They rebuilt his corral, repaired the windmill, even carved irrigation paths through the dry soil so water could flow again. Elias could only watch, overwhelmed, tears forming without permission. But it didn't end there. As the sun dipped low, the elder returned, holding out a carved wooden totem depicting a hawk in flight. "This," he said, "is the mark of Apache protection. Any who see this will know Elias Thorne is friend to our people. None may harm him." Elias accepted it with trembling hands, but unable to speak. Kahana stepped closer. "We came at dawn because dawn is beginning," he said. "Today your life begins again." Before leaving, the Apaches prepared a grand meal, sharing fire and stories with the rancher who had once lived in silence. Elias learned more about their culture in those hours than settlers learned in decades. When night fell, 1,000 Apaches rode out the same way they came, silent, powerful, united, leaving Elias standing amid a ranch transformed beyond recognition. He looked at his restored land, the flowing water, the sturdy structures, the carved blessing in his hand, and realized he had been given a second chance, not through wealth, not through luck, but through kindness. As the moon climbed high, Elias whispered into the quiet desert, "Thank you, all of you." And the wind carried his words into the mountains, where the Apache drum seemed to answer in the distance.